Even after being gently turned away, Egan could not stop thinking about the quiet resilience in Tu Tieu's eyes, the way she cared for every little corner of her world with silent determination. Early that morning, as the sun gently rose behind the clouds, he wandered through the market, not to shop for himself, but with the thought of easing someone else's burdens. He stopped in front of a poultry stall, drawn to a group of small, fluffy chicks chirping in a woven basket, fragile lives, just like hers, full of potential yet vulnerable. He asked for the smallest ones, those that needed warmth and care, believing they would find shelter and hope in her hands. Then he bought a bag of rice, not much, but enough to fill a few bowls, enough to mean one less worry. Carrying the food and the birds close to his chest, he walked a familiar path, quietly, deliberately, without expecting anything in return. Upon reaching her place, he paused at the entrance, hesitant, remembering the last time she had returned his gift with trembling hands. This time, he didn't knock. He gently set the bag of rice beside the door and tiptoed to the coop, carefully placing the chicks in the soft straw as though tucking in sleeping children. His eyes lingered on the little yard, on the modest garden she had tried to keep alive despite the harsh rains. Before leaving, he glanced back once, hoping she would let the gift stay. Hoping she would see the gesture for what it was, not pity, but quiet care. A light drizzle began to fall as he walked away, his footsteps slow, shoulders slightly hunched, not from the weight of the sack but from the unspoken emotions he carried. Inside the house, Tu Tieu had just returned from a long walk, her clothes damp and her hands red from the cold. She stood still as her eyes landed on the unexpected offerings. Warmth in a sack of rice, tenderness in a box of tiny chicks. She didn't say a word, but her hands moved instinctively, gathering the rice, gently lifting each chick as if they were pieces of something long lost and slowly returning. And in that quiet moment, without promises or grand gestures, something soft began to unfold between two people who had only ever known how to give in silence. The morning air lingered with the faint scent of damp earth and straw, as Tu Tieu knelt quietly beside the small coop, watching the tiny chicks explore their new world with timid steps. She had not spoken a word to anyone about the gift left at her doorstep. Yet the way her fingers scattered grains on the ground revealed a quiet acceptance, a silent acknowledgement of kindness received. Her palms, rough from days of labor, cupped each chick with a care reserved only for things that might not last, as though afraid that too much warmth would make them vanish. She stayed there a long time, her eyes following the fragile flutters and hesitations of life so new and vulnerable, perhaps reminded of her own first steps in this unfamiliar place. The bag of rice remained untouched beside the door for hours, not out of pride, but as if she needed time to believe it was truly hers to keep. And when she finally brought it inside, it was with the same care one might carry a memory too precious to speak aloud. She cleaned the coop with quiet diligence, repurposing old boards and tying loose corners of wire, turning what was once empty into something safe and warm. Not far away, the sky began to shift, clouds parting briefly to let in a wash of light that gently lit her silhouette as she moved about the yard. The gurgle of water from a clay jug, the soft rustle of leaves, and the rhythmic pecking of the chicks became the day's only music, simple, undisturbed, and full of life. Though her lips never curved into a smile, there was something softer in her expression, a weight slightly lifted, even if just for a moment. She sat on the small stone step, hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the small yard now filled with signs of movement and quiet growth. The wind brushed strands of hair across her face, and she didn't bother to brush them back. It was as if even the wind had become a familiar companion. There were no grand dreams that day, only the steady presence of now, and the humble satisfaction of having something, however small, that depended on her care. And though the pain she carried was never far, it no longer pressed so heavily on her chest, softened, perhaps, by the flutter of little wings and the silent gift of another's thoughtfulness. In the gentle stillness of that afternoon, without words or witnesses, the first thread of healing quietly stitched itself into the seams of her life. The morning mist had barely lifted when Tu Tieu stepped out with an old woven basket slung across her shoulder and determination quietly written in her gait. Her steps carried the weight of quiet resolve, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that moves forward even when no one is watching, along the winding path to the fields. The sound of her sandals brushing against the wet grass mingled with the distant croaks of frogs and the hush of wind weaving through sugarcane leaves. She approached a humble farmhouse and spoke in a voice so soft it barely rose above the breeze, offering her hands for a day's labor in exchange for enough to last another. The farmer, worn and honest, handed her a hoe and pointed toward the farthest patch of land. Untouched and heavy with weeds and yesterday's rain, she nodded without hesitation, accepting the work not as a burden, but as a quiet chance to carry her life forward with dignity still intact. As her hands dug into the earth, thick and soaked, mud clung to her skirt and streaked across her arms. But her rhythm never faltered. Each strike of the hoe was deliberate, echoing not just effort, but a silent conversation with the land, one that required no answers, only perseverance. The sky remained overcast, shielding her from the harshness of the sun, but the droplets of sweat still formed on her brow, dripping slowly onto the ground she toiled. Around her, the distant hum of machines echoed across the valley, a reminder of the world that moved on, fast and indifferent, while she chose to walk her own path, one furrow at a time. She worked alone, yet not lonely, for there was a quiet pride in the way her shadow stretched across the earth, proof that she was still here, still capable, still becoming. The soil beneath her fingers no longer felt foreign, and with every weed she pulled, she seemed to reclaim a little more of herself. When the field was finally cleared, she stood in the middle of her work, surrounded by the raw beauty of effort made visible, breathing slowly, not from exhaustion, but from quiet triumph. She walked back toward the farmhouse, her clothes heavy with mud, her hands blistered, yet her heart steadier than it had been in days. And as she handed back the hoe and received the humble wages in return, she didn't count the coins, she only bowed slightly, with gratitude shaped by silence and strength. The scent of fresh soil still clung to her clothes when she returned from the fields. Her feet sore but her spirit steady, the reward not in coin alone but in the knowledge that she had endured. She was rinsing her hands beneath a thin stream of water when Yuri appeared, not with grand gestures, but with the gentle concern of someone who had been quietly watching from afar. He didn't ask why she labored alone or how long she had walked. He simply offered to take her to a place where fruit had ripened without hands to harvest it. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she had the strength for more, yet something in his voice, calm and familiar, made her nod without needing words. The road to the orchard was quiet, flanked by wildflowers and soft winds, and as they rode, the weight of the day seemed to lift little by little, carried off by the hum of the tires against gravel. When they arrived, the sight before her was unexpected. Rows upon rows of dragon fruit trees, heavy with color and life, untouched, as if waiting only for her. She stepped gently between the vines, running her fingers across the thorns not with fear, but with care, and chose her first fruit like one might choose a memory to keep. Yuri handed her a pair of shears, and their hands brushed briefly, just enough to acknowledge something unspoken, something kind. As she cut the fruit, her movements became more certain, and a quiet rhythm formed between them, one picking, the other gathering. Like two parts of a song without lyrics, the fruit was warm from the sun, its skin soft and vibrant, and when Yuri sliced one open for her to taste, the sweetness caught her by surprise, lingering on her lips like a smile almost remembered. She didn't say much, but the way her eyes lit up for a moment told him more than any words ever could. They moved slowly through the orchard, collecting fruit not just for market, but for a moment of peace neither of them had known in a long time. And though the sky above remained gray, the orchard itself felt bathed in a different kind of light, one that came not from the sun, but from the small comfort of presence shared, when their baskets were full. She sat beneath one of the trees, wiping her hands on her skirt, the fruit resting beside her like quiet proof of a day made meaningful. And as Yuri watched her from a short distance, he didn't speak either, for he, too, understood that sometimes, the most healing thing is simply to be with someone who asks for nothing but your time. With the morning's harvest carefully wrapped in banana leaves and tied with thin strips of rattan, Tu Tieu carried each bundle with both hands, her back slightly Bent not from weight, but from the quiet burden of responsibility she had learned to carry alone, Yuri walked beside her in silence, his steps matching hers, his hands occasionally reaching out, not to carry what was hers, but to make the way a little smoother. They found a small, shaded spot at the edge of the market, where a torn canvas tarp flapped gently in the wind, offering just enough shelter from the clouds gathering above. She laid out the fruits one by one, arranging them not for show, but with a care that made even the ordinary seem precious. Yuri brought her a simple woven tray to display the best ones, and though she didn't ask, he wiped the dust from the stones where she would sit. A soft drizzle began to fall, misting the air with a chill that clung to her sleeves and hair, but she remained still, her eyes watching each passerby with quiet hope. The dragon fruits glistened under the thin layer of rain, their vibrant skin like lanterns in a gray morning, a humble beauty that seemed to call out softly amidst the noise. A woman stopped, her umbrella tilted, and asked about the price, not with haste, but with curiosity, drawn by the care in their presentation. Tu Tieu weighed the fruit with steady hands, her voice barely rising, yet carrying the warmth of someone who knew how to hold gentleness even in hardship. More people came, some drawn by the sweetness of the fruit, others perhaps by the quiet strength in the seller's demeanor. The coins she received were few, but each one felt earned, each exchange a reminder that effort, however small, could still lead to something real. Yuri stayed close, never interfering, only stepping in when she struggled to shield the fruit from the rain, lifting the tarp a little higher, placing stones to keep it from flying. He didn't speak much, but his presence wrapped around the space like a silent promise. You don't have to do this all alone. When the wind grew stronger and the rain heavier, he brought her a second cloth, not new, but clean, and tucked it beneath the fruit to keep them dry. She smiled briefly, not at him, but at the way the fruit now looked safer, as if it, too, had found shelter in this shared moment. Children passed by and pointed at the pink fruit with excitement. She gently offered them one to taste, and their laughter lingered longer than the drizzle. The market was no grand place, yet beneath the modest tarp and beside a quiet man, she felt something stir, something like belonging, something like peace. Hours passed, and her basket grew lighter as more hands reached out to buy what she had gathered with care. Though her fingers numbed with cold, she never stopped straightening the display, brushing droplets away from each piece of fruit as though preserving their story. When Yuri returned from a quick errand with a small bamboo mat for her to sit on, she accepted it with a nod, and for a moment, their eyes met in a stillness deeper than words. She did not ask why he stayed, nor did he explain. Sometimes companionship doesn't come in declarations, but in the way someone holds an umbrella without being asked. As the sky darkened, and the marketplace began to empty, she gathered the remaining fruits into her basket, her motions slower but not weary. Together, they packed in silence, each movement mirroring the other, like two pieces of a story learning to be told side by side. She didn't say whether the day had been good or hard, but the calm in her eyes said enough, that for once, she had not been alone beneath the rain. And as they walked home through puddled roads, the sound of water beneath their feet blended with the quiet comfort that had begun to bloom. Small but steady, like hope taking root, the rain had slowed to a whisper by the time they reached the house, the sky bruised with dusk, and the scent of wet earth clinging to their clothes as if nature itself had shared in their long day. Tu Tieu gently set the basket of unsold fruit by the door, and without pause, turned her steps toward the clay jars beside the stream, where she had seen crabs gathering after the rain. She moved with quiet efficiency, sleeves rolled, eyes steady, her bare feet finding balance on the slick stones while her hands dipped into the cool water with practiced ease. Each crab she caught felt like a small triumph, simple, humble, yet necessary for the meal she was already envisioning in her mind. Back home, Yuri had begun washing the dragon fruits, placing them neatly on a cloth, not for sale this time, but for sharing, perhaps with no need for coin anymore. He watched her return with a quiet admiration. He never spoke aloud, noticing how even exhaustion could not dull the care in the way she handled each ingredient. Soon the kitchen corner, though sparse, began to fill with the rhythms of preparation. The scrape of a knife against bamboo, the soft hiss of water boiling, the rhythmic Chop of mang tuoi sliced thin. She moved around the hearth with a familiarity that spoke of years of tending to others, and now, perhaps, just beginning to tend to herself. Yuri joined her without a word. Offering his hands to peel, to cut, to stir, not as a guest, but as someone who had found meaning in helping where he could. Together they boiled the mang, crushed roasted peanuts, sliced herbs, and seasoned the crab with ginger and salt, each motion slow but intentional, like a ceremony of belonging. The steam curled into the air, mingling with the fading light, and the scent of home, however temporary, settled into the walls of the small space. Tu Tieu, with her sleeves damp and face flushed, stirred the pot of Ryu with a tenderness that made the humble dish taste richer than any feast. Yuri prepared the bamboo tray and laid the bowls gently, placing a small plate of pickled vegetables in the center. As if arranging offerings at a quiet altar of gratitude, they did not speak of the past, nor of loneliness, but in the way she passed him a spoon, and he refilled her cup, there was a quiet understanding that needed no voice. As they sat side by side, knees almost touching, the simple meal between them became something far more than food. It became memory, it became warmth, it became care. The crab soup was rich, the bamboo salad fresh with lime and herbs, and for a moment, the silence was not empty, but full of presence. Yuri complimented the flavors with just a glance and a second helping, and Tu Tieu, though not smiling, let her eyes linger longer than usual. The storm outside had passed, but inside, something still reigned, something softer, like a release, like the comfort of not having to be strong alone. He cleared the bowls while she rinsed the spoons, a silent rhythm between two people who had found companionship not through words, but through shared actions. The warmth of the hearth faded slowly, but the warmth in the air remained, woven into each gesture that asked for nothing but gave so much. Before leaving, Yuri glanced at the coop, at the quiet chicks nestled in straw, and then at her, still kneeling by the fire, adding herbs to a pot she would finish alone. He didn't ask to stay, nor did she ask him to leave, and yet their parting felt like neither, a pause, not an ending. As he stepped into the night, she lingered at the door for a moment, fingers brushing the edge of the frame, her breath rising in the cool air like a silent thank you. Inside, the dishes were clean, the pot still warm, and the scent of crab and herbs clung to the air like a reminder that even quiet evenings could be full of meaning. And in the stillness that followed, she sat alone, but not lonely, for in the echoes of the evening, she had shared something that no one could take away. The rain had ceased entirely, leaving the world damp and hushed, as if even nature itself was holding its breath after a day of quiet unfolding. Inside the modest home, the scent of dinner still lingered in the air, crab, herbs, steamed rice, now mingling with the earthy aroma of wet soil seeping through the open window. Tu Tieu sat with her knees drawn in, slowly drying the wooden spoons with the corner of her scarf, her hands moving as if in rhythm with thoughts she had yet to name. Yuri remained nearby, not speaking, only watching with the patient attentiveness of someone who had learned the language of silence through lived experience. The light from the oil lamp flickered gently, casting soft shadows across the floor, and in its glow, the lines of weariness on her face softened, replaced by something almost peaceful. She didn't smile, but there was a stillness in her that no longer felt like resignation, it felt like a beginning. Hesitant and unsure, yet undeniably present, Yuri leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his knees, eyes drifting to the coop outside where the chicks huddled together in straw, sleeping soundly in the quiet safety she had built. Then, without planning to speak, he murmured a simple offer, a piece of unused land nearby, a place she could plant what she liked, shape with her own hands. She didn't answer right away, only looked toward the door, as if imagining rows of green sprouting from a soil that might finally belong to her. In that moment, her silence was not refusal, it was contemplation, a pause that allowed room for something tender to grow. Yuri stood to leave, brushing dust from his pants, his motions unhurried, his presence lingering like the last warmth from a fire that had burned just long enough. As he stepped toward the door, her voice, quiet and low, thanked him, not for the food, nor the land, but for simply being there. He didn't turn around, instead, he nodded once, the kind of gesture that says more than words ever could. Outside, the stars were beginning to pierce through the clouds, shy and scattered, as if uncertain whether it was safe to shine. Inside, Tu Tieu carefully folded the cloth napkins, stacked the bowls, and placed them on a shelf with quiet precision, like rituals marking the end of a sacred day. Yet her thoughts didn't settle, they wandered, to the land he mentioned. To the shared meal, to the strange comfort of another person's quiet loyalty. She sat at the threshold once more, eyes tracing the dark outline of trees swaying in the breeze, her fingers curled around the edge of the wooden doorframe. A faint sound caught her attention, footsteps, not heavy, but purposeful, growing louder from the direction of the woods. She rose slowly, unsure whether to call out or remain still, her heartbeat quickening not from fear, but from the weight of the unknown. Pressing gently at the edges of her evening, and as the shadow approached, barely visible beneath the moonlight, she narrowed her eyes, the warmth of the earlier peace now stirring into quiet suspense.